This is Nayaswami Jyoti. And we also have Sanjan with us. We're all from Ananda village, soaking up the wonderful vibration that is here in this part of the world. So thank you very much for having us here. I'd like to begin by reading from Paramahansa Yogananda's book of answered prayers, Whispers from Eternity. Open my inner eye, O fountain of light, that I may behold thee in the dance of the myriad hued atoms. Burst open the doors of space, that I may see thee behind the swirling mist of material illusion. Behind the walls of brilliant cosmic rays, thou art hiding. Open every portal in nature, that I may see thee everywhere. There's a wonderful line in the amazing poem Samadhi from Paramahansa Yogananda where it says, I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me. And indeed, that's what this understanding of the Son of God, the Son of Man, is relating to, that we are both, just as Jesus was both in that sense. But our true identity, of course, is in being the children of God. It reminds me of this joke where these women who all have adult sons were talking about their positions, and a number of them were, these sons were in the church. And they were talking about the salutation, the greeting that people would say when they met these adult sons. And they would range from your reverence, your excellency, your holiness. And then this one woman, she said, well, my son is so big, when people see him, they say, oh my God. So she trumped all the others. That's it. Oh my God. Well, it's humorous, because it is, but it's really how, in a sense, we are God. You know, Swami Kriyananda often, in the early years, when he would travel with groups of us, and he would see us, and you know, in those years, many people slept on the floors of people's living rooms and bedrooms and yards, whatever was available. And one time he came into a group of devotees sleeping, waking up in the morning, and said, good morning, great souls, which of course is the name of a book that our beloved Gyan Devi actually put together, stories, a collection of stories from Ananda people about their spiritual journey. So if you ever get a chance, make sure you read that book, Good Morning, Great Souls. But isn't that a wonderful way to relate to one another? That we're picking it up at that highest level, that experience of who we really are. Because we are both. And Jesus represented that being the children of man, the Son of Man, we are in this world. But the deepest experience is that transcendence, that experience of God as who we are. And that comes from the depth of meditation, from that transcendence, from the level of consciousness in the conscious realm, or even the subconscious realm, that we dive deep into the superconsciousness, into cosmic consciousness. And so the path of Kriya Yoga, the emphasis of Kriya Yoga as that transformative, transcending technique, is very important for us because it enlivens the experience that is already ours. It's not that we're adding that experience of being a child of God. We're nurturing the remembrance of that, the memory of that. And indeed, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali, who brought the Yoga Sutras together as a scripture, emphasizes this idea of smriti, the Sanskrit word smriti. And it actually means various things. But the way that we're using it here, and is the primary focus of the word, is divine remembrance of who we are as the soul qualities, the experience of that divine in everyday life. But sometimes we don't even think we're worthy to be called even the Son of Man, let alone the Son of God. I remember reading this collection of true ads in newspapers, and one was this ad saying, Are you illiterate? Write us for help. Well, sometimes we're sort of like that. We're not even sure where that is. Or this other story I read, this newspaper reporter had retired, and he was connecting with the local chapter of the literacy organization. And he was talking to the person at the other end of the call. And she said, I appreciate you connecting with us. The only question I have is, are you seeking help or are you wanting to help? Meaning, being a reporter, she wasn't sure that he was that literate. You know, that idea that, what language have you been using, you know? But we find ourselves really in that same position where we know what's lacking, and sometimes that is the burden of our awareness. I mean, that's why we have the purification ceremony every Sunday here before this part of the service. And Daiva and Gangamata just expressed it very beautifully today, this morning, about what that is. The idea that we already are the soul qualities. It's not like we're missing that part. What we're missing is the realization of that part. But that's a subtle but important distinction to make. Because if we're thinking we're trying to get somewhere with purification, then it's sort of like that carrot on the stick. It's always extending beyond us. But if we come to the realization, what we're doing is we're releasing that which isn't us, because we already are that which is us, that we come into the experience of that. Not just, as Daiva said this morning, or Gangamata, just the mindset of it, but we feel that experience. We know that experience, because that's who we are. And so the qualities of living the life outwardly are important because they allow a continuum of that inner life that we receive in meditation. Because of course what's trying to happen is that we remove the separation. There is no inner life and outer life in truth. They come together. And every moment, every aspect of who we are is naturally woven with who we are at our center as the soul being one with God, expressed in our outer life, being that same soul and the soul qualities, enlivening the world around us, enlivening us, but also enlivening the world around us. And so they sort of stole my talk, which I won't blame them for, but we must have been in sync. That when you come to the understanding that every moment is a gift to explore that special realization of our divinity as being children of God, then there are certain things that we can bring to focus in a more powerful way that really creates that magnetic highway, that spiritual journey being magnetized to bring us to that oneness again. And so certain qualities that certainly Jesus emphasized in what he brought us, if you think about the Beatitudes and what's there. But also Paramahansa Yogananda, in his emphasis for us, he talked about that kindness is the magnetism that draws God's grace into everyday life. Isn't that nice? Kindness is the magnetism that draws God's presence into everyday life. Why kindness? Why not just love? Kindness, in a way, is the activating flow, the activating momentum of love connecting. Because love can have entanglements. Love can be in the heart pulling with emotions. Or, as we know, love can be in the heart lifting us with devotion. But the idea that kindness is that activating force of love to bring it into a real experience with others, to nurture that kindness, especially when we don't feel kind to others. That's the aha moment. It's fine when things are going great. We can be kind to others. But if we can nurture always the reminder, the memory, when we're not doing well, let us express kindness. And so sometimes I've said to people that I serve with at Ananda village in the Nanda Sangha office, if you're having not just a bad hair day, but a bad consciousness day, the only emphasis that's important for that day is to be kind to others. Because it completely shifts that momentum of being caught in the whirlpool of things aren't fair, poor me, why didn't they? They should be. And we come to the point where all those things aren't really relevant. What's important is we open up with kindness to touch other people, because that transforms us. That wonderful phrase, which I think is going to be the beginning of our PowerPoint presentation on the worldwide, Ananda Worldwide and what it's doing. We'll share that with you after service, after we have a chance to mingle. We'll come back and we'll focus. But I think the quote that we used from Yogananda is, "The instrument is blessed by that which flows through it." Well, we have to engage in that. It's not like, again, that we're waiting for everything to line up and it's rosy for us, and we say, okay, I can be an instrument now. I mean, granted, we want to move as much energy in that direction with momentum when things are going right. But really the shifts in our consciousness being awakened more is when the things aren't going the way we had envisioned, or we had endeavored with all our energy to move in that direction. That's when we open up the floodgates of the grace of God. And kindness is a very activating way of being that way, because immediately our hearts shift into the openness of aspiration, of devotion, of touching others. But also, that leads to compassion. And compassion is said to be that which doesn't involve our need to feel a reward back of sharing with others. Where sympathy is. Sympathy, if you actually look up the dictionary definition of it, it's more that your awareness is in consort with someone that's suffering. But it's separated. And empathy is more of a connectedness. Your feelings are there rather than just thinking of someone. Empathy is when you feel the pain of others, but it's still separate. Compassion is when we're active in a relationship with someone that's suffering. And that doesn't mean any particular way. It doesn't happen to be that you need to then do this activity or this thing for someone. Try to always tune into what's coming from your own intuitive sense of that. Because I know for a lot of us, doing the healing prayers is very, very powerful to really activate that compassion, that we're really engaged with that experience of someone that's suffering. Not the suffering itself. We're engaged in the experience of lifting that energy for that person. It's not that we want to remove that obstacle for that person. Who knows? That obstacle may be the primary gift in that lifetime for that person. It's not that we want to remove the obstacle when we pray. We want to open up the floodgates with our compassion and prayer so that other person can be lifted up. And then come into that experience of that challenge, that obstacle, to overwhelmingly be beyond that into more grace. But you can see that compassion is is just a powerful experience of being with others. But as that prayer of Yogananda says, the instrument is blessed by that which flows through it. We become much more the one that's being blessed, even though those that we're acting as a channel to bless are obviously receiving that blessing as well. But this is when we start to narrow the gap between the Son of God and the Son of Man for ourselves. Because I think the emphasis of this part in Jesus' life is to really remind us of this. I remember years ago when we had the Center for Ananda in San Francisco, and we had an ashram house. We had a 45-room mansion in Pacific Heights that we rented. And we had 9.5 bathrooms, luckily, to facilitate, because we had 24 people living in this house together. And we gave a lot of classes both at the center and at the house. And we were exploring at that time, so this was in the early 1980s, classes really picking up on both Yogananda's and Swami Kriyananda's emphasis on the second coming of Christ and the teachings of Christ in this deeper way. And this is before the publications of the second coming of Christ from Self-Realization had come out, and before the book from Swami Kriyananda, Revelations of Christ, came out. So we were kind of trying to piece it all together. And I remember this man who had been coming more recently at that time. He was an Episcopal priest that had retired. And somehow his journey took him into exploring Yogananda's teachings and coming to Ananda at that time. And we were doing this class series, and he said, I have to make this comment, that it's important that people understand that the name isn't Jesus Christ as if it's John Smith. It isn't if it's Mr. Christ. Can we help you? Or can you help us? But it points out this dilemma of Son of God, Son of Man, that Jesus is the vehicle that the Christ consciousness was moving through perfectly. But as his teachings brought us, and certainly what Yogananda and what Swami Kriyananda furthered in our understanding, that Christ consciousness is as much alive in you and me. We're just not cognizant of it. We're not steeped in that direct experience. And so that's our role in this life, actually in every life that we've lived, is moving towards that conscious awareness of that. Because we are the Christ consciousness. We are that experience. But we need to make sure it's coming to the fullness in every part of who we are. So when the tests come, that's the time when our outer life becomes the vehicle to move with the inner life and to be an instrument to serve others. And whatever qualities you feel intuitively to move with, to tune into, to expand, trust that. Trust that that's a sign for you to open up in that way. But don't shy away from the tests that come and you just feel you're being overwhelmed. You're sort of being crushed down to the ground. Feel at the right time, tune in with prayer, with meditation, and deep intuitive perception as much as we can at the time, to find when is the right time to take on those deeper challenges. Because if we open up to that, that is the true purification. There's this word in Sanskrit, it's one of the niyamas of the 8 limbs of yoga in the Yoga Sutras that Patanjali gives us. And it's the third one of the niyamas, tapasya. And normally we use the word tapasya more as austerity and that kind of idea. But really the deepest meaning of it is that it's a purification. Tapasya means to burn up. That's the deepest experience of it. Asha said at one point, Asha Prabhu, who was our main minister down in Ananda Palo Alto, said there was an Indian film they were watching, and when the word tapasya was spoken, the subtitle in English was devotion. And at first that rings kind of out of place, doesn't it? tapasya, if you understood the word more from austerity. Devotion seems somewhere out of left field. But just settle into it a little bit and think of it as purification. Of course devotion is a part of that. It is the self-offering with devotion that allows that purity, that burning up, the release of things that aren't us. And so that, as we know from Yogananda's emphasis, there are no obstacles. There are only opportunities. So it goes beyond being a platitude that we can nod our head and say, got it, to the point where we feel it is us, that we are that opportunity through whatever happens with us in the world around us. And that's really the joy of Palm Sunday, even though it has that mixed blessing, that we know that Jesus faced the ultimate obstacle as a Son of Man by being arrested, imprisoned, brought before a trial, and condemned, and then crucified. But of course, as we will explore next week, there's the resurrection. But that self-offering was always there in that experience of this week of Palm Sunday through the days that succeeded this before Easter. That self-offering, that tapasya of lifting the energy, the purification with the self-offering of devotion. Let's take a moment to meditate on that.